All right, let's talk about some noteworthy fantasy performances from rookies. Noteworthy can be good or bad, depending on the player. We begin with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals. This was not the debut that anyone anticipated. One reception for 4 yards on three targets. Now, like I said in the video I released yesterday, there is no reason to be concerned. Everyone can have a bad debut. Caleb Williams did. Jaden Daniels, while he did have a good amount of rushing yards and touchdowns, as a passer, there was a lot to be desired. So the raw stats don't tell everything. However, when we think about his performance this week, he didn't, first of all, receive the target share. But when we look at his snap share, he was at 90%, the leader among all receivers here, even more than Trey McBride's 85%. So that is encouraging that he's on the field. Granted, you would expect the fourth overall pick to be on the field, but hey, at least he is getting the playing time. When we look at his target share, though, it's only at 9.68%. He only received 3 total targets. Now, I will say, he was wide open on a busted coverage for what would have been a 40-yard touchdown. Kyler Murray was under so much duress during the game that he didn't see him. That was a common theme against Buffalo. I will say, in regards to everyone I'm going to mention in this video and just the NFL in general, week ones are a little bit fluky in comparison to what we might expect for the rest of the season for anybody, really. Teams have had months to be able to game plan for the team they're facing in week one. So teams are much more prepared to play against the team they're playing in week one than they're going to be against hardly any of the other teams in the NFL. So that is one thing to note. And one reason to not be overly dramatic in terms of negative performances. Now, positive performances can be misleading depending on the context, such as snap share and target share, rush share, whatever share and position you're talking about. But I would be very, very cautious about worrying too much about some of these poor fantasy performances. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. did have a drop as well, so it was just kind of a bad game for everybody in this offense. I mean, even though Trey McBride had a 29.03% target share, he still only ended up with 5 receptions for 30 yards on 9 targets. This was just a forgettable performance passing-wise altogether. When we look at Trey Benson, I wasn't really sure what to expect in week one, but it is encouraging that he was on the field. Granted, he only played in 13% of the snaps, but we knew with Trey Benson, he wasn't going to just overtake James Conner outright to begin the season. James Conner is a very talented running back. What we're hoping for is a gradual eating into James Conner's work, and then with an injury, a really good performance or two to capitalize and seize the job. One other thing to note, Trey Benson, while it was on a limited sample size, so I wouldn't pay too much importance to this. To be fair, he did have a better yards per carry average than James Conner. He had 4.3 to James Conner's 3.1. And now we will have to see how that plays out over the course of the season, so I wouldn't pay too much attention to just one random 3-carry performance, but that is something to note. And another thing to like is Trey Benson was targeted in the passing game. Now, it was only a 5-yard reception, but that is good that he's getting receiving work as well, even if it's only a 3% target share. Overall, I would definitely expect Marvin Harrison Jr. to have a big week 2 in comparison to this at least. And with Trey Benson, let's be cautiously optimistic that he might be able to increase his playing time gradually, because 4.3 yards per carry and capitalizing for 5 yards on his target is very, very good considering the minimal work he got. And remember, based on what we've seen here, he is one injury away from being the starting running back in this offense. Up next, we have Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills. Now, to be honest with you, was cautious about Keon Coleman. I didn't take him in any drafts. It's not that I wouldn't have taken him if he fell to me and was a good value. I just didn't really end up with any shares, but I wasn't necessarily going out of my way to get any. Now, this wasn't, once again, because I don't like him as a player. They said they were using him at X, and he just, in general, does not have the prerequisites to being a good X receiver. However, the target share was absolutely there. He led the team with a 21.74% target share, And he also led all receivers, and by receivers, actual wide receivers, with 73% of the snaps played. Dalton Kincaid did finish with 84%, but Dalton Kincaid also, strangely, only had an 8.7% target share. Very, very weird week overall. So overall, it's very nice to see that he, first of all, led all wide receivers in snap share, but also led the entire team in target share. He did make a nice grab in the game for 28 yards. I liked what I saw, and I hope for him to be more of a red zone threat for them. He did have one target in the end zone that was a pass interference penalty, so he could have ended up with a touchdown. I do think he's going to be a very solid touchdown scorer because besides the fact that he's good and has a very good contested catch skill set, they also just lack other wide receivers that have such prowess, really. You could argue Matt Collins, who did end up with a touchdown. Khalil Shakir, to his credit, did too. But Keon Coleman is, in my opinion, the most likely candidate to receive the highest amount of red zone and specifically end zone targets. All right, now we have Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. Let's not overreact about the week 1 performance. In the video I mentioned today, Shane Waldron was quite successful during his tenure as offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, at least analytically. Now, everybody, including myself, was a little bit unhappy with the utilization of Jackson Smith and Jigba. But to be fair to Shane Waldron, they had tackle injuries the entire season. I mean, they even had a tackle injury on Sunday. So he did have to play a lot more 12 personnel probably than he even wanted to. Although I will say they did use quite a bit of 12 personnel. I mean, Gerald Everett had a 61% snap share, and Cole Kmet had a 48% snap share. Now, Gerald Everett out snapping Cole Kmet and then having an equal share of the targets was also a bit strange in my opinion. So I don't know how to feel about that. But one thing we can like about Rome Odunze, he was second in snap share in week 1. I was telling everybody, now, did he perform particularly well? No, I didn't expect this kind of performance, so no. But I was telling people there's a good chance he's the starting wide receiver in 2 wide receiver sets, and he finished with a 77% snap share. Now, his target share of 13.79% definitely isn't as good as I would have preferred. Keenan Allen's was a crazy 37, almost 38% of the targets is wild. And then DJ Moore with his own 27.59%. Although that was to be expected. Rome Odunze is a rookie wide receiver. They traded for Keenan Allen. They just signed DJ Moore to an extension. As far as what we saw from Caleb Williams, he did have a couple of overthrows that were just atrocious, to be honest with you. He also had horrendous drops. Specifically, Keenan Allen's drop in the end zone comes to mind. Now, did he have the best performance? No, but he didn't turn the ball over, and he was relatively smart with his selection. He was just, in my opinion, a little bit frazzled because it was his first game. I will definitely cut him a break, just like all of these rookie quarterbacks. Judging somebody and determining whether or not they're going to work out after one game, unless they're like Nathan Peterman with his 5 interceptions, is one thing. But just not having a tremendous completion percentage in and of itself is nothing to worry about over a 1-game sample size. Moving on to Adonai Mitchell of the Indianapolis Colts. His stat line of 1 reception for 2 yards on 5 targets doesn't seem so great in and of itself. I will say, though, he was wide open for 2 long touchdowns. His stat line would have looked insane. It would have been probably, 3 for 100 and something and 2 touchdowns if he would have been accurately thrown the ball on those 2 potential long scores. Anthony Richardson is, we'll discuss his play in a different video, but just note that he was a couple plays away from having a monster game. This is somebody that if you can still get him for cheap, if somebody is just looking at the stat line of, 1 for 2, if you can buy the dip on him, if there is any dip and somebody's worried about his performance and they're overreacting, get him now. When we look at his snap percentage, he was 3rd in the pecking order behind Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman Jr. However, look at his target share, 26.32%. More than 1/4 of the targets went to him. Now, the production didn't go his way. The production went Alec Pierce's way, but on a week-to-week basis, that is going to be incredibly fluky, especially considering what has Alec Pierce done on a regular basis. I mean, he was as efficient as he could have possibly been with his targets, which, is a credit to him. He isn't the least talented wide receiver in the world or anything, but Adonai Mitchell was roasting the cornerbacks he was facing. Overall, this wasn't the best receiving performance for anybody besides Alec Pierce and Ashton Dulin. Ashton Dulin was incredibly lucky just to have his touchdown. Anthony Richardson hit him right in stride perfectly. Anthony Richardson was a tale of two halves. He had every target to Alec Pierce and the one to Ashton Dulin was spot on. However, the two to Adonai Mitchell were just awful. That's going to change from week to week. Some weeks he's going to be more on and some weeks he's going to be more off. But I really liked what I saw out of AD Mitchell. And I think that if somebody's panicking over the 1 for 2 on 5 targets, you could definitely take advantage of that because he was roasting the cornerbacks. He is going to have big games this season. Moving on to Brian Thomas Jr. His 77% snap share was second among all wide receivers and anyone in the receiving core, that including Evan Ingram or Travis Etienne, really. That is very, very encouraging. Now, he tied for the lead in targets for the team with Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. That's a very, very positive sign. He finished with a solid stat line of 4 catches for 47 yards and a touchdown. He was as efficient as he could have possibly been. I will say he almost had a much bigger day. He beat Jalen Ramsey and was in prime position for a touchdown, but Ramsey interfered with him. And then on the touchdown that he actually scored, he did beat Jalen Ramsey to the left corner of the red zone. Trevor Lawrence hit him with some insane anticipation on a throw. And so it only took 1 week for him to have about 50 yards and a touchdown. I was telling people in my Brian Thomas Jr. video that I recently released, this guy has some very high upside, and some people didn't like that. That's too bad. He has a lot of upside. I liked what I saw from him. He was even faster than I thought he was going to be. He's going to be so, so good. If there is an opportunity for a dip, if he has a couple of bad weeks, snag him while you can in Dynasty. And in redraft, just let him ride the bench a little bit longer just to make sure that he's getting the consistent target share. And then if he is able to get, 4 to, say, 7 targets regularly per game, you could use him situationally to fill out a bye week wide receiver or even in your flex if necessary. Here we have Xavier Legette. I was very impressed with what I saw from him. So he did lead the team in targets. He beat out Deontay Johnson by 1 target. He finished with a 23.33% target share, which obviously led the team if he had the most targets. However, when we look at his snap share, it was at 59%. That was just ahead of Jonathan Mingo and behind Adam Thielen and Deontay Johnson. So he was third in the pecking order. They used a lot of wide receivers this game. The one thing he has going for him, besides his obvious talent, is that the Panthers are pretty bad, it looked like. And now I wouldn't overreact, just like with any of these other teams, the Bears, the Falcons, any of these teams. I wouldn't overreact over 1 week. I do think they're going to be pretty bad in general, though. I think it was just exasperated by the fact that it was week 1 and the Saints had weeks and weeks to prepare for him. And so while maybe his 4 for 35 stat line doesn't impress too many people, if he can maintain this level of volume, say 5 to 7 targets per game, and then gradually ramp that up, if he can start to outshine Jonathan Mingo a lot more in terms of snap share and target share, he's probably not going to beat out Deontay Johnson. He's probably not going to beat out Adam Thielen, but if he can establish himself firmly in 3 wide receiver sets for the majority of the game, there is some upside with Xavier Legette, because while Bryce Young is probably not going to be the quarterback that we all hoped, in my opinion, just due to his height, it's not that he doesn't have the theoretical skills. Dave Canales is going to help him maximize his potential, whatever ceiling that is with Bryce Young. And I think that Xavier Legette is going to have a much better season than some people anticipated. Moving on to Malik Neighbors. So he didn't lead the team in receptions. He finished one behind Wan'Dale Robinson. He did finish second in targets with 7 behind, once again, Wan'Dale Robinson, who surprisingly had 12. That was interesting. The one positive, though, and now I say one positive, let me rephrase that. The most positive thing is look at his snap share 100%. That is what we like to see, because how are you going to get targets if you're not on the field? He is obviously their best receiver. He should have been targeted much more in terms of proportionately compared to Wan'Dale Robinson, because he's just more talented. And what were our concerns? It's that his ceiling is going to be a little bit limited because of Daniel Jones and the general dysfunction of the Giants. I do expect things to smooth out a little bit more for him because, once again, with all these teams, it's just week 1. But I was very thoroughly encouraged by the fact that he had 5 receptions for 66 yards on 7 targets. He looked explosive on the field. He's going to have a very high floor because he is by far the most talented player. And I expect his targets to go up substantially compared to the proportion in which he was targeted this week, at least in terms of his target share. I'd expect him to have a 30 to 35% target share over the course of this full season. And so I expect his usage to gradually increase. I'd expect him to finish usually with at least 7, but probably right around 10 targets per game. He is by far their best receiver. He looked explosive on the field, and his ceiling is only limited by the fact that Daniel Jones is his quarterback. Moving on to Jayden Daniels of the Washington Commanders. When you just look at the surface stats, he had the game that we had wished Caleb Williams would have had. I will say, though, while he was 17 of 24 for 184 yards, a lot of his passes were right around the line of scrimmage. We didn't see the deep ball that we saw in the preseason and all throughout college. He obviously still possesses a beautiful deep ball. We'll have to see whether or not defenses are going to start trying to stop the run more than they attempted to, at least. It didn't look like they tried in week 1 against Jayden Daniels to see if maybe he can hit a couple deep balls. We didn't see what we projected from Terry McLaurin. I would have expected a decent game for him. But nonetheless, it was very encouraging because we knew that he was going to have the rushing floor. 16 carries for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. I will say one thing about him I was concerned about was he doesn't slide. He takes crazy hits. He took some big hits this game. He is going to need to slide because he is going to get himself hurt. He needs to learn from Anthony Richardson in that regard because, first of all, he is nowhere near the size of A-Rich. If this guy does not learn to slide, he is going to be out for periods of time. But anytime he plays, he's going to offer you massive upside, as is evidenced by his very high finish this week for us in fantasy. I will say, though, once again, while it was a better performance from a statistical standpoint than Caleb Williams was, it's not quite as good as you might think. Like I said, a lot of the passes were right along the line of scrimmage, a lot of yards after catch. He ran a lot. They had 30 rush attempts compared to 24 passing attempts. He did take 2 sacks for 23 yards. In Dynasty, we are going to need to see more yards per attempt. We're going to need to see that deep ball in action here. You can't run an offense along the line of scrimmage the entire time. Defenses will figure that out. And he is going to need to stop taking these massive hits, or he is going to be out like A-Rich was this past season. But nonetheless, he has an extremely high floor. He has the skills necessary. All he has to do is stop taking these hits. All they need to do is get some looks downfield for him. Terry McLaurin, we'll see if he can get on the same page. There is a ton of sky-high potential here and a very, very safe floor. For the long term, though, we do need to see some development as a passer, as we do with all of these rookie quarterbacks. In redraft, he is going to be a top 10 quarterback generally on a week-to-week basis. We've already seen 88 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. That is a crazy floor. If he's able to develop or just in general have a more efficient game in the sense of more yards with his completions. 17 completions for 184 yards isn't very good. If he's able to increase that and, get passing touchdowns here and there, he is going to offer QB1 weekly upside. So overall, I was still very impressed with his performance. It's just for his longevity, he really needs to stop taking these hits, and he's going to need to pass the ball much further downfield than he did in week 1. I was on the record as saying I was very, very concerned about Bo Nix, and I'm definitely not going to overreact, just like with Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, because it's just week 1. There is still plenty of time for him to figure things out. He doesn't have the best situation, and that was really more so my concern than him as a player, because in college he was incredibly efficient. He did like to throw the ball very close to the line of scrimmage, and doesn't have the best arm in terms of talent to get the ball deep downfield and arm strength. But he is much better than this performance indicates. One positive thing, we did see the rushing upside. He had 5 carries for 35 yards and a touchdown. That part of his game was still there. However, he was 20 out of 42 for 138 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 picks. It's going to be a process for him. His best asset in the passing game is Courtland Sutton. Hopefully they decide to improve that next season to allow him to have a functioning offense. And hopefully they can at least become a little bit more efficient on the ground. I will say I was quite surprised with Jaleel McLaughlin leading the backfield in carries. That one shocked me. We'll have to see if that continues on a week-to-week basis. But as you can see below, Bo Nix, technically tied with Audric Estime, was the most efficient runner of the football that they had. And so I think no need to panic yet. It's a work in process once again. It's only week 1. I will say he does seem to have a little bit better of a floor than some may have expected based on his rushing ability alone. And I wouldn't overreact yet. Now, from a redraft perspective, there are tons of quarterbacks that I would rather have on a week-to-week basis. But from a dynasty perspective, definitely don't panic yet. I would definitely at least wait 1 year to see who they select and if they can get him some more help in the receiving game. Because with that rushing floor, if he can just grow a little bit as a passer, get more comfortable, and have better targets to throw to, there's a lot more upside than we saw in this game. And now we have Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. He finished with 5 for 39 and a touchdown on 7 targets. He is looking every bit of the PPR machine that we all thought that he could be. When we look at his snap share, his 67% did tie for second under Josh Palmer. And his target share, to his credit, was the highest at 26.92% out of anybody. The only issue I foresee is that on a week-to-week basis, the passing volume is probably never going to be very high in a Greg Roman offense. Trust me, I'm a Ravens fan. So I don't like that for him in terms of limiting his ceiling. It's just, if they could have hired anybody but Greg Roman. But it's Jim Harbaugh. He's going to run, and play defense. He just needs to, over the course of the season, establish himself firmly as a number 1 target, and then he's going to give us a very, very safe floor from a week-to-week basis. And if he can, once again, establish himself a little bit more than the other wide receivers in the pecking order and consistently get, 6 to 8 targets per week, he is going to have a much higher ceiling than he had in this first game. And I will say on his touchdown, it was filthy. He juked out 2 players for that touchdown. Ooh, if you haven't seen it, watch that highlight. It was crazy. Quentin Johnston, he had 67% of the snaps played with a 19.23% target share. I will say his 3 for 38 was exactly what we saw in college. Drag routes that were schemed to him in which he was able to run upfield. Now, as in terms of being an actual talent, I don't really believe in him long term, but if he is going to get these, if he can get, 6 to 7 targets per week and then get these schemed drag routes to get him some yards after catch, he could give us solid fantasy performances. It's just when they try to do much of anything else with him, he doesn't really perform very well. But yeah, overall, very encouraging that he did have a 67% snap share. It was second among all wide receivers. I expect that to gradually increase. I think he's going to be starting as a flanker in 2 wide receiver sets and generally as a flanker slot in 3 wide receiver sets throughout his career. I expect his snap share to increase gradually. Now, his target share probably won't go up too much, but certain games, they'll probably pass a little bit more than they did this game. So there is the potential for more of a ceiling, but I think this guy is going to have a very safe floor from a week-to-week basis, and I like what I saw from him on film. All right, let's not overreact, but Brock Bowers was the leading receiver in terms of targets and receptions in his first game. He didn't edge out Devontae or Jakobi Meyers in terms of receiving yards, but this was very encouraging. Now, once again, it's only 1 week. We'll have to see next week if he maintains this 24% target share. I expect Davante Adams' target share to go much up. It was very surprising that he only had an 18.8% target share. Even if that guy isn't open, he's open. So I expect that to go up just a little bit. It'll just remain to be seen as to whether Brock Bowers' target share goes substantially down or if it stays the same or even goes up. I doubt it'll go too far up if it does. But nonetheless, very encouraging. 6 for 58 on 8 targets. He looked decent after the catch. He did have a lot of contested catches for generally short gains in this offense. And with Gardner Minshew at the helm, I think that his ceiling is limited compared to what it could potentially be. But this guy was one of the top tight ends in his first game as a rookie. That doesn't, considering it was 6 for 58 and no touchdown, that says a lot about the tight end position in week 1. But nonetheless, this guy's really talented. He was a first-round pick. It was the worst place he could have gone, in my opinion, just about in the entire NFL. And he still had 6 for 58 on 8 targets. So that's very encouraging. When we look at his snap share in comparison to Michael Mayer, they did run quite a bit of 12 personnel. I did expect that because it wouldn't make any sense to draft Michael Mayer in the second round to just then draft Brock Bowers and relegate Mayer to the bench. So Michael Mayer had a 57% snap share as opposed to 68% for Brock Bowers. And once again, Brock Bowers had a 24.24% target share compared to Mayer's 9.09%. I expect Alexander Madison's target share to go quite a bit down. I expect Jakobi Meyers to remain relatively the same. I expect Davante Adams to go up. I think Brock Bowers is going to probably dip just a little bit. And I think that Michael Mayers and Trey Tucker's will probably remain somewhat the same. So I do worry about Brock Bowers' ceiling in this offense, but I think he's going to be a pretty safe floor player from week to week. And so I think he's going to become a must-start option sooner rather than later if he isn't already. If he's on your team, there's a good chance that he is your best tight end. But nonetheless, in Dynasty, this was very encouraging. And in redraft, this was even more encouraging because rookie tight ends are very unpredictable in terms of their production. So once again, very, very impressive. All right, so those are my observations of fantasy-related rookies in week 1. I thought there were some impressive performances based on the stats that we saw, but I also thought there were some impressive performances that weren't indicated by the stats, such as A.D. Mitchell, for instance. Nonetheless, I was very impressed with most of these performances. I think that there is no reason to overreact positively or negatively based on 1 week, especially in week 1. Week 1s, if you think and look back every year, week 1s in general are not indicative of what we see throughout the rest of the season. But what do you think? Which rookies were you impressed with in week 1 and which rookies were you not impressed with in week 1? Let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, if you like videos and analysis like this, please feel free to like and subscribe. It lets me know that you want to see more videos like these. Thank you and have a good day.